Some of the most famous faces on the planet are fighting battles the cameras were never meant to see. Behind the interviews and the headlines, there are diagnoses being kept quiet and families making decisions no one prepares you for. A few of these stories have only become public in the last few months. Stay until the end, because the final name on this list is someone you would never expect. Number 15. Bruce Willis. For decades, Bruce Willis was one of the most bankable action stars in Hollywood, known for playing characters who seemed impossible to break. In 2022, his family announced he was stepping away from acting because of aphasia, a condition affecting his ability to communicate. Roughly a year later, in February 2023, his family shared a more serious update. Willis had been diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia, a progressive brain disorder that affects behavior, personality, and language long before it affects memory in the way most people associate with dementia. Frontotemporal dementia is different from Alzheimer's disease in a critical way. It typically strikes people earlier in life, often in their 50s or 60s, and it attacks the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain first, the regions responsible for decision-making, social behavior, and speech. Willis was 67 at the time of the diagnosis. His family, including his wife Emma Heming Willis and his ex-wife Demi Moore, made the unusual choice to co-parent his care together, blending both households so his 5 daughters could remain part of his daily life. Emma Heming Willis has since become a visible advocate for FTD awareness, describing publicly how the disease has continued to progress and how the family has adapted their home and routines around his needs. There is currently no treatment that reverses frontotemporal dementia, only approaches that manage symptoms as they emerge. By the end of 2025, reports indicated his condition had continued to advance, limiting his mobility and verbal communication further, and heading into 2026, sources close to the family suggested his day-to-day needs required round-the-clock support. Willis built an entire career on being the guy who held it together when everything fell apart. Now his family is doing that instead, one day at a time, largely out of the public eye. He is not the only television legend whose mind is being taken from them long before their time. The next name on this list once welcomed millions of viewers into their living room every single day, and for a long time, she hid what was happening to her. Number 14. Wendy Williams. For over a decade, Wendy Williams built a media empire on being unfiltered. Her syndicated talk show made her one of the most recognizable voices in daytime television, known for asking the questions other hosts wouldn't. But starting around 2021, viewers and colleagues began noticing changes. Her speech would slow. She would lose her train of thought mid-sentence. Public appearances became increasingly rare, and when they happened, something felt different. In February 2024, a statement confirmed what many had suspected. Williams had been diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia and primary progressive aphasia, the same broad category of illness affecting Bruce Willis. Primary progressive aphasia specifically targets language first, making it harder to find words or express thoughts clearly, even while other cognitive functions remain intact for a period of time. Doctors noted that Williams had actually received these diagnoses back in 2023, but her care team held off on a public announcement to allow time for further testing. Her situation became further complicated by a legal guardianship arrangement put in place due to concerns about her cognitive state and financial vulnerability, one that has remained a source of tension, with Williams publicly objecting in interviews and insisting she is more capable than she is being given credit for. A Lifetime documentary released around the same time as her diagnosis showed the toll the disease had already taken. Unlike Alzheimer's, frontotemporal disorders progress differently in every patient, making a timeline nearly impossible to predict. What doctors do agree on is that the disease is degenerative and currently has no cure. As of 2026, updates on her condition have remained limited, filtered mostly through her guardian. A woman who spent her career giving her honest opinion on everyone else's life is now unable to fully advocate for her own. She is one of 2 people on this list who kept a diagnosis secret for years before the public ever found out. The next name did something almost identical, holding on to a diagnosis that had already been quietly reshaping his life for years before he ever said a word about it publicly. Number 13. Danny Glover. Danny Glover spent nearly 5 decades as one of the most respected actors in American film, known for his role in the Lethal Weapon franchise and for decades of activism around civil rights and social justice. He built a reputation as a steady, thoughtful public figure, someone who chose his words carefully and used his platform deliberately. In July 2026, Glover confirmed in a televised interview that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. What made the announcement particularly striking was the timeline he revealed alongside it. Glover had actually received the diagnosis back in 2023. 3 years before he said anything publicly. During that entire period, he continued making public appearances, giving interviews, and attending events, all while privately processing a diagnosis that would eventually affect nearly every part of his cognitive function. Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia, gradually destroying memory and thinking skills before eventually impairing the ability to carry out simple, everyday tasks. It develops slowly, often over many years, which is part of why Glover was able to keep his diagnosis private for as long as he did. In his interview, he acknowledged that the disease would likely progress and that daily life would continue to change as a result. His decision to speak now was framed around wanting to contribute to broader public understanding of the disease, particularly within Black communities, where Alzheimer's research and awareness have historically lagged behind other demographics. Studies show Black Americans are diagnosed with Alzheimer's at nearly twice the rate of white Americans, yet remain underrepresented in clinical trials. 3 years of silence, followed by one deliberate reveal. Glover chose to speak when he was ready, on his own terms. The next person on this list did not get that same choice. Their diagnosis arrived suddenly, in the middle of a routine checkup, and it changed everything within the span of a single conversation. Number 12. Joe Amabile. Joe Amabile became a familiar face to reality television audiences through his appearances on The Bachelorette, Bachelor in Paradise, and later Golden Bachelorette-related programming, where his easygoing personality made him a fan favorite. Unlike most names on this list, Amabile is not a decades-long industry veteran. He is in his late 40s, otherwise healthy, and was not expecting a life-altering diagnosis when he went in for what began as a routine set of scans. In July 2026, Amabile shared on social media that doctors had discovered a glioma, a type of tumor that forms in the brain's glial cells, the supportive tissue surrounding nerve cells. Gliomas vary enormously in severity, from slow-growing and low-grade to aggressive and fast-spreading. In his announcement, Amabile described undergoing multiple scans and MRIs before doctors determined it appeared to be an early-stage tumor, describing the weeks leading up to the discovery as an emotional swing between relief and fear. Following the diagnosis, Amabile announced he would be undergoing brain surgery to remove the tumor, a procedure that carries its own significant risks depending on the tumor's exact location and proximity to critical brain structures. Surgeons operating on gliomas often have to balance removing as much of the tumor as safely possible against damaging tissue responsible for speech or movement. What has stood out to many following his story is how suddenly it all unfolded. There were no prior warning signs discussed publicly. One set of scans, ordered for an unrelated reason, uncovered something growing quietly inside his skull. Recovery from glioma surgery can take months, and even after a successful procedure, patients typically require ongoing monitoring for years. As of this recording, Amabile's recovery remains ongoing, with updates coming directly from him. His story is a reminder that these diagnoses do not wait for anyone to be ready. Neither did the next one, which struck a beloved musician mid-performance in front of a live audience before anyone knew there was a problem. Number 11. Billy Joel. Billy Joel has spent over 5 decades as one of the defining voices of American music, with hits that remain radio staples generations after their release. In February 2025, during a concert in Uncasville, Connecticut, Joel fell on stage. At the time, the incident was attributed to vague, unspecified issues, and several tour dates were postponed while he underwent further evaluation. By May 2025, the full picture became public. Joel had been diagnosed with normal pressure hydrocephalus, a neurological condition in which excess cerebrospinal fluid accumulates in the brain's ventricles rather than being properly absorbed. As the fluid builds up, it puts pressure on surrounding brain tissue, leading to difficulty walking, worsening balance, bladder issues, and cognitive decline that can closely resemble dementia. Doctors noted his symptoms had been worsened by the physical demands of recent performances, affecting his hearing, vision, and balance. What makes normal pressure hydrocephalus unusual on this list is that, unlike most conditions discussed here, it is potentially treatable and in some cases reversible when caught early. The standard treatment involves surgically implanting a shunt, a thin tube that drains excess fluid to another part of the body. Caught before significant brain damage occurs, many patients see meaningful improvement following treatment. Joel canceled his remaining tour dates through the summer of 2026 to focus entirely on treatment and physical therapy. Family members, including his ex-wife Christy Brinkley and his daughter Alexa Ray Joel, have provided periodic updates describing a slow but steady recovery process. By January 2026, Joel made his first public performance since the diagnosis, offering a hopeful sign to fans who feared they might never see him on stage again. His story stands apart because of that word, reversible. Not every condition offers that same possibility. The next case belongs to a professional athlete whose body had always been his greatest asset, until it began failing him in a way no training could prevent. Number 10. Chris Johnson. Chris Johnson spent 10 seasons in the NFL, largely with the Tennessee Titans, where he became known by the nickname CJ2K after rushing for over 2,000 yards in a single season in 2009, a feat achieved by only a handful of players in league history. He built his entire career and identity around explosive physical performance. After retiring in 2017, he remained active, working out daily and staying involved with his family. In June 2026, at 39 years old, Johnson revealed in an interview that he had been diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, commonly known as ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. ALS is a progressive neurodegenerative disorder that attacks the nerve cells responsible for controlling voluntary muscle movement. As those nerve cells die off, the brain gradually loses its ability to communicate with the muscles throughout the body, eventually affecting the ability to walk, speak, swallow, and ultimately breathe, and there is currently no cure. Johnson explained that the first symptom appeared as a subtle weakness in his right hand, which he and his wife initially assumed was residual wear from years on the football field. It wasn't until the weakness worsened that he sought further evaluation, leading to the ALS diagnosis. He described the disease's progression as shockingly fast, noting that despite being diagnosed relatively early and participating in experimental treatment programs, he had already reached a point where holding a cup had become difficult. Researchers have long studied potential connections between ALS and repeated physical trauma in contact sports, though no confirmed causal link has been established for most cases. Johnson and his wife, Brittany, have chosen to speak publicly, specifically to draw attention to the need for expanded ALS research funding. A man once defined by speed is now living with a disease that steals movement piece by piece. He is not the only performer on this list whose career depended on physical control. The next name built his entire livelihood around his hands, and a tremor he initially tried to hide eventually became a diagnosis he could no longer keep quiet. Number 9. Tom Dumont. Tom Dumont has played guitar for the ska and pop rock band No Doubt since the late 1980s, helping craft some of the biggest hits of the 1990s alongside frontwoman Gwen Stefani. After a long hiatus, the band reunited in recent years, culminating in a highly anticipated residency at the Sphere venue in Las Vegas. Just weeks before that residency was set to begin, in April 2026, Dumont revealed to fans that he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. In a video shared on social media, he explained that he had actually started noticing symptoms years earlier, which eventually prompted visits to his doctor and, later, a neurologist. A series of tests confirmed it was early-onset Parkinson's, a classification given when the disease develops before the age of 50. Parkinson's disease is a progressive neurological disorder that primarily affects movement, caused by the gradual loss of dopamine-producing neurons in the brain. Symptoms commonly include tremors, muscle stiffness, slowed movement, and balance difficulties, all of which tend to worsen over time. For a guitarist, whose craft depends on fine motor control in the hands, a Parkinson's diagnosis carries a particular kind of weight. Dumont described living with the disease as a daily struggle, but noted with visible relief that he was still able to play guitar and perform at a high level. He credited other public figures who had spoken openly about their own diagnoses for giving him the courage to share his story during the band's highly publicized comeback. Parkinson's currently has no cure, though medication, physical therapy, and in some cases surgery can help manage symptoms for years, sometimes decades, depending on how the disease progresses. Dumont chose to reveal his diagnosis on his own terms, before anyone else could report it first. He is one of several people on this list living with Parkinson's, and the next case belongs to a man who has quietly carried the same diagnosis for years, becoming one of the most respected voices in the acting community for how openly he discusses it. Number 8. Alda. Alda spent much of his career as one of television's most trusted faces, best known for his role as Hawkeye Pierce on MASH, a performance that helped define an entire era of American television. Off-screen, Alda became known for his intelligence and curiosity, hosting science programming and becoming a respected voice in public communication of scientific ideas. In 2018, Alda revealed that he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease roughly 3.5 years earlier. He explained that he decided to speak publicly about it, not because his symptoms had become impossible to hide, but because a news story about someone else's diagnosis had circulated using a photograph of him with a subtly noticeable tremor, and he wanted to control the narrative around his own health before speculation did it for him. Since his diagnosis, Alda has become one of the most visible advocates for Parkinson's awareness in the entertainment industry, discussing tools he uses to manage symptoms, including boxing workouts, marching to music, and other targeted physical therapy techniques that neurologists have found can help slow movement-related symptoms. He has been candid that these approaches do not cure the disease, but they have allowed him to maintain a level of function that has surprised even his own doctors. Now, in his late 80s, Alda has continued limited public appearances, often emphasizing that a Parkinson's diagnosis is not an immediate ending, but the beginning of a different kind of life that still has meaning within it. Alda has lived with this disease longer than almost anyone else here, offering a long view of what the coming years may hold. But even his experience pales beside the man widely considered the most recognizable face of Parkinson's disease in the world, diagnosed decades ago at an age far younger than almost anyone expects. Number 7. Michael J. Fox. Michael J. Fox became a global star in the 1980s through the sitcom Family Ties and the Back to the Future film trilogy, roles that made him one of the most recognizable actors of his generation. In 1991, at just 29 years old, Fox began experiencing a persistent twitch in his left pinky finger. After a series of consultations, he was diagnosed with young-onset Parkinson's disease, a diagnosis so unusual for his age that doctors called it exceptionally rare. For 7 years, Fox kept the diagnosis private, continuing to act while privately adjusting his life around a disease that was steadily progressing. He revealed his condition publicly in 1998 and has since become arguably the most influential advocate for Parkinson's research in the world. In 2000, he founded the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research, which has raised well over $2 billion toward finding treatments. Now in his 60s, Fox has spoken candidly about how significantly the disease has progressed over more than 3 decades, describing broken bones from falls, memory lapses, and periods where his speech becomes difficult to control. In interviews, he has been unusually direct about mortality, stating plainly that he does not expect to live to be an old man, a reflection of a clear-eyed understanding of how the disease typically progresses. Despite the physical toll, Fox has continued limited acting work and remains deeply involved with his foundation, appearing at fundraising events and testifying before government bodies about continued research funding. Fox has spent more of his life with Parkinson's than without the fear of it looming over him. For the next name on this list, the disease threatened to take away the exact thing that had made her famous in the first place. Number 6. Linda Ronstadt. Linda Ronstadt was one of the best-selling and most versatile vocalists in American music history, moving fluidly between rock, country, opera, and traditional Mexican music across a career that produced dozens of hit records. Her voice was, by every account, the defining instrument of her career, praised for its range and precision across genres that rarely shared performers. Around 2000, Ronstadt began noticing changes in her singing voice that she could not explain. Over the following decade, the changes worsened, eventually making it physically impossible for her to sing at all. In 2013, she revealed she had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and that the condition, not aging alone, was the reason she could no longer perform. She has explained that Parkinson's affects the muscles used for breath control and vocal projection just as much as it affects the limbs, meaning the disease took away the one part of her body her entire identity was built around. Ronstadt has described the loss of her singing voice as a distinct kind of grief, separate from the disease's broader physical challenges. She has continued occasional public appearances, sometimes requiring assistance to move, and has remained engaged in interviews and documentary projects reflecting on her career. Now in her late 70s, Ronstadt has said she does not dwell on what the disease has taken, focusing instead on the music she was able to make while she still could. She has become an advocate for Parkinson's research, even though she is candid that she does not expect a cure to arrive in time to change her own circumstances. Where Ronstadt lost her voice, the next two people on this list have fought simply to keep their bodies moving, both diagnosed with a disease that attacks in a very different, less predictable way. Number 5. Christina Applegate. Christina Applegate built a decades-long career in television and film, from her breakout role as a teenager on Married with Children to her later Emmy-nominated work on the Netflix series Dead to Me. In 2021, while filming the second season of that show, Applegate began experiencing symptoms she couldn't initially explain, including numbness and coordination problems that made physically demanding scenes increasingly difficult. She was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, an autoimmune disease in which the body's immune system mistakenly attacks the protective covering of nerve fibers throughout the brain and spinal cord. This disrupts communication between the brain and the rest of the body, leading to a wide and unpredictable range of symptoms, including muscle weakness, coordination difficulties, and fatigue. MS affects everyone differently, and its progression can vary enormously, which makes long-term prognosis difficult to predict. Applegate initially chose to keep her diagnosis private, continuing to film Dead to Me while managing symptoms on set, something she later said became increasingly difficult to conceal. She went public in August 2021, explaining she wanted to control her own story rather than have it revealed through speculation. Since then, Applegate has spoken candidly about how significantly her mobility has changed, describing her use of a cane and, at times, a wheelchair, along with weight fluctuations tied to medication and reduced activity. She has been unusually blunt in interviews about the toll the disease has taken on both her body and her sense of identity, describing frustration with a body that no longer responds the way it used to. At the same time, she has continued working, including hosting a podcast where she discusses both her career and her ongoing health in detail. Applegate has said she does not know what the coming years will look like, only that she intends to keep working and speaking honestly for as long as she is able. Her openness has helped push MS further into mainstream conversation, something the next woman on this list, diagnosed with the same disease 3 years earlier, has spent her own career trying to do as well. Number 4. Selma Blair. Selma Blair spent the late 1990s and 2000s as one of the more recognizable faces in American film, appearing in movies like Cruel Intentions and Legally Blonde. For years, she experienced unexplained symptoms, including numbness, fatigue, and balance issues that doctors struggled to diagnose, at times attributing them to stress or unrelated causes. In October 2018, Blair was finally diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, ending nearly a decade of uncertainty about what had been happening to her body. She went public with the diagnosis a few months later, appearing at public events using a cane and speaking candidly about symptoms including slurred speech and difficulty walking, refusing to hide the visible effects of the disease from cameras. In 2019, Blair underwent an aggressive treatment called a hematopoietic stem cell transplant, a procedure that uses chemotherapy to essentially reset the immune system before reintroducing the patient's own stem cells to rebuild it. The treatment is high risk, but for some MS patients, it has shown the ability to halt the disease's progression entirely. Blair documented much of this journey in a 2021 documentary, showing both the physical toll and emotional weight of the treatment. Since the transplant, Blair has described her condition as being in remission, though she notes this does not mean she is cured, and that she continues managing residual symptoms and a long recovery process, including relearning basic physical skills and using mobility aids as needed. Blair has used her platform to advocate for greater investment in MS treatment, particularly stem cell therapies that remain inaccessible to many due to cost. Her story offers something rare on this list: real evidence that aggressive treatment can meaningfully alter a disease's trajectory. The next name, however, hid the exact same diagnosis for nearly 2 decades before telling the public the truth. Number 3. Jamie-Lynn Sigler. Jamie-Lynn Sigler became known to audiences in the late 1990s for her role as mezzo-soprano on the acclaimed HBO series The Sopranos, a part that made her famous while she was still a teenager. What most viewers didn't know at the time was that Sigler was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2001, at just 20 years old. Sigler kept the diagnosis private for 15 years, continuing to act, dance, and perform publicly, while privately managing a disease that causes unpredictable flare-ups affecting mobility, vision, and coordination, going to significant lengths to hide symptoms, including altering choreography and camera blocking to disguise moments when her legs would not cooperate. She finally revealed her diagnosis publicly in 2016, explaining the emotional and physical toll of hiding it for so long had become unsustainable. Since then, Sigler has become considerably more open, describing periods where she has needed a cane and later a wheelchair, as fatigue and mobility symptoms have progressed with time. Sigler has also discussed the emotional experience of raising children while living with a progressive disease, describing conversations with her sons about her condition and her determination to stay as physically present as possible for as long as she is able. She has continued acting and public speaking engagements centered on MS awareness, noting that earlier diagnosis could have changed her own experience with the disease. 15 years of silence, followed by nearly a decade of advocacy. The next case involves someone who thought he had already beaten his disease once, only to be told, months later, that it had returned in an entirely different form. Number 2. Dave Coulier. Dave Coulier spent decades in television comedy, best known for his role as Joey Gladstone on the sitcom Full House and its later revival, Fuller House. In 2024, at 66 years old, Coulier was diagnosed with stage 3 non-Hodgkin lymphoma, a cancer that begins in the lymphatic system, part of the body's immune network. Stage 3 indicates the cancer has spread to lymph node regions on both sides of the diaphragm, requiring aggressive treatment. Coulier underwent roughly 6 months of chemotherapy, a grueling process he documented publicly, describing extreme fatigue and the physical toll of repeated treatment cycles. In March 2025, he announced he was cancer-free, sharing the news with visible relief. That relief was short-lived. In October 2025, just months after declaring his recovery, Coulier revealed a second, entirely separate cancer diagnosis: HPV-related oropharyngeal cancer, a form of throat cancer that had developed in his tongue with no warning signs. Unlike his lymphoma, this second cancer was found incidentally, catching both Coulier and his medical team off guard. HPV-related throat cancers have become increasingly common, and doctors note survival rates for this specific type tend to be relatively favorable when caught early, with cure rates cited in some cases as high as 90%. Coulier has since undergone additional treatment, describing the psychological difficulty of facing a second cancer battle so soon after believing he had put the disease behind him. 2 unrelated cancers within the span of about 18 months, arriving with almost no time in between to simply feel relieved. Coulier's story is a reminder that a clean scan does not always mean the danger has passed. The final name on this list holds a position unlike anyone else here, a reigning monarch whose cancer diagnosis was disclosed to an entire country and the world in real time. Number 1. King Charles III. King Charles III ascended to the British throne in September 2022 following the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, becoming the oldest person in British history to take the crown at 73 years old. In January 2024, Buckingham Palace announced that Charles had undergone a procedure for an enlarged prostate, a common and typically non-serious condition in older men. It was during that unrelated procedure that doctors discovered something else entirely. In February 2024, the palace confirmed a separate issue had been identified during his prostate treatment, and that King Charles had been diagnosed with a form of cancer. The specific type has never been publicly disclosed, consistent with the family's approach to medical privacy, though the palace confirmed it was unrelated to his prostate condition. Charles began a schedule of regular treatments shortly afterward, a departure from decades of royal tradition in which the family kept health matters almost entirely private. Charles has described his decision to share his diagnosis publicly as intentional, believing transparency from a public figure in his position could help normalize cancer screening and treatment conversations for ordinary people. A palace spokesperson reinforced this, stating that if public good could come from sharing details of his diagnosis, doing so would be considered both a pleasure and a duty. Throughout 2024 and into 2025, Charles continued reduced official duties between treatment sessions. By late 2025, palace sources indicated his treatment schedule would likely be reduced heading into 2026, cautiously framed as a positive sign, though the palace stopped short of describing it as remission or cure. As of the most recent updates, Charles continues to balance his duties as head of state with an ongoing course of treatment, a balancing act watched closely not just by the United Kingdom, but by millions of people around the world, hoping their own cancer journeys might end as gracefully as his appears to be unfolding so far. 15 different diseases, 15 different lives, all still being lived one appointment, one treatment, and one day at a time, largely away from the cameras that made these people famous in the first place. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more history documentaries.